Hi, I'm Steph and I volunteer for the Art for Wellbeing group here at the Hub on a Thursday. I've been lucky enough to be invited to do some art workshops based around the Story Project and the road names of Lockleaze. Some of the artists that we've looked at include Downman, Thornycroft, which is a whole family of sculptures, Thomas Rowlandson, William Hogarth, Landseer, and James Gilray, William Morris, and Thomas Gainsborough. One week we looked at 3 artists. They were all cartoon or caricature artists. So we looked at Gilray, Hogarth, and Rowlandson. They were all interested in political satire, where you take the mick out of politicians and things that are happening at the time. And at the moment, with the whole COVID situation and who we've got for presidents in the UK and America, is quite a nice activity to actually, in this scary time, make something a bit humorous and do cartoons about our politicians saying silly things and having a bit of fun. So I do recommend having a go at drawing your own caricature, but I would avoid doing your teachers or your friends, as they might not seem the funny side. So I definitely choose politicians or famous people, as I think they're fair game. Another artist that we looked at was Downman, and interestingly, he and Thomas Gainsborough both painted a Welsh actress called Sarah Siddons. She was a very good actress at portraying tragedy, and she played a lot of William Shakespeare's more tragic characters. Interestingly, the film All About Eve with Bette Davis and Marilyn Monroe, in one of the opening scenes, one of the actresses get given an award called the Sarah Siddons Award, which was a completely fictitious award. But after that film, they then made this award a reality. So in Chicago, every year, there is now an award called the Sarah Siddons Award, where they give it out to the most tragic actress in, I think it's Chicago. So it's completely made up in the film. They used it in one opening scene, such a small part of the film, but people really liked that idea of celebrating a female actress from so long ago. And again, interestingly, she was so famous that back then in the newspapers, they would write articles about them, and she was very celebrated, and she tried to keep her private life really personal, because even back then, women who were seen to be going out and doing things that women shouldn't be doing, even with a celebrity, they would get kind of bullied a bit in the press. So she tried to avoid that, and then she retired from acting. And then I think it was Queen Charlotte asked her to do another performance when she was quite old, and she wasn't too sure, but she did it. And because obviously, as you do when you get older, you don't look as lovely as you do when you're young. Well, some people do. So she did this performance, and obviously as she's getting older, maybe it wasn't her best performance, but it's still a good performance. The newspapers completely ridiculed her about the way she looked now, because as people age, especially back then with all the illnesses and stuff, they didn't have the treatments we do now. So I think she probably had a bit of a crooked spine and things like that. So even back then, women were held more accountable for the aging process. So what's interesting about Downman is when everyone was doing oil paints of portraits, they would take hours, days, weeks, and someone would have to stand still for hours and not do anything. Whereas he created this technique where he could do one kind of drawing using chalk pastels really fast, and then be able to copy them 12 times, so that you wouldn't just have one portrait, you'd have multiple. So if you were quite wealthy back then and you wanted a portrait of yourself in your house, you could also give them to your friends or your family, whereas before you'd have this one big portrait that's very grand, all in oil paints that would take years to complete. But now you could have a lot more, because obviously now we can just take a photo and send them to everyone. But back then, if you wanted people to have a photograph of you or a painting, it would take a lot longer and it'd be really expensive. That's why you only see kind of rich or celebrity people in the portraits. But if you look at Hamo Thornycroft, I think he was the first person to do a sculpture of a British workman. So he was on a boat trip down the Thames and he saw a mower or a sewer doing just labour with his shirt off really hot, and so he did a sculpture of him, and he based the sculpture actually on the statue of David because they didn't have the exact proportions, but based on a sketch. That was one of the first sculptures of working class in Britain. And Hamo Thornycroft, he's got a sculpture of the sewer. So he's got two, the mower and the sewer, and I can't remember which one came first. But the sewer is actually a statue in Kew Gardens. So if you're ever in London and you go around Kew Gardens, you can have a look at his sculpture. But with Hamo Thornycroft, all of his family were really talented. So his father was a sculptor, his mother was a sculptor, his two sisters were artists, and then he was a sculptor. His mother worked quite a lot with royalty, doing I think it's Queen Victoria, her children, in these beautiful kind of marble sculptures. And then his youngest sister, Teresa Thornycroft, she had 3 sons, and one of her sons was Siegfried Sassoon, who, if you're interested in history, that name might ring a bell, because he was famous for doing the Soldiers' Declaration, where he protested against the war, saying that they're prolonging it to make more money, they're sacrificing all these lives, and it's wrong. So he was really stood up. He was from quite a wealthy family. They were all artists, so it wasn't coming from someone low class. It was someone who, I think he was quite high up in the army as well, so it did have a lot more clout. But then they did put him in a mental health facility with Wilfred Owen, who's another war poet, and they became really good friends because Siegfried Sassoon also used to write a lot of poems. Back then, you'd have things called shell shock, where they didn't really know what to do with you, so they'd put you kind of away. And with his declaration, they decided to blame that on him being unwell. There's a really interesting book called Regeneration by Pat Barker. So if you are interested in the war and about the poets who were in the war and like war and mental health, that's a really good book. Edwin Landseer, he was famous for painting dogs. He did horses and deers, but he was mainly known for painting dogs, and he liked to do them with kind of quite human expressions on their faces. And there was a type of dog called a Newfoundland dog, which I only recently learned about. They're these quite big black dogs, but they also come in black and white, and the black and white ones are now named Landseer dogs after Edwin Landseer because he used to paint them a lot. And interestingly, at the workshop we did about Edwin Landseer, someone in the group said that they saw the Newfoundland dogs doing a water rescue at the harbour side. And I was like, oh, I knew that they were used as water rescues because they're really big, strong dogs back then, but I didn't realise they were still used now. So even now you can still see these dogs being used to help people and save people. But Landseer also was one of his biggest pieces of art that everyone has hopefully seen are the 4 lions at Trafalgar Square at Nelson's Column. So he had these big lions and they took years to complete, but he was such a procrastinator, like a lot of people. So when he got offered the job, he said, I'll do it, but I'll start in 9 months. I don't know if he had another project going on or if he just thought, I want to do it, but not yet. So then he started making it, and there was quite a few delays and his health started deteriorating, but they're done and people still climb on them, play on them today. And that's really nice to see. And I think it's nice to point out that just because you're a procrastinator doesn't mean you're not going to make something amazing. Sometimes you just do need that time because everyone works at different paces, so you can still make something amazing. So William Hogarth is famous really for starting the cartoon strip, because he made series of illustrations where they were like engravings, where they would tell a story. They'd have beginning, middle, end, and that's how cartoons started. They're in these kind of square boxes, and he was always trying to shock the reader into better behaviour. So he was concerned more with the morals of things. So one of his famous works is called A Rake's Progress, where this man, a rake, which back then meant it was a man who inherited money. He didn't earn it. Someone passed away and he got a lot of money, and he would just waste it. He'd waste it on drink, women, all the naughty things in life. And so instead of kind of showing it as one picture, he did the story of a rake's progress, which is actually a rake's downfall. So he started off with getting measured up for a suit, whereas everyone else around him is grieving. They're putting up a mourning curtain. And yeah, so everyone's in mourning. He's just there thinking, I've just made all this money, just going to go out and spend it. So he's getting a nice suit. He had his pregnant fiancée, left her, went and did, drank loads, gambled loads. Then when he got into some trouble, his fiancée then comes back to try and help him, takes her help because he was getting arrested, and then leaves her. And because he's ran out of money because he's wasted it all, he then marries a very old widow who's very, very wealthy. And then his pregnant ex-fiancée is then distraught again. And then he wastes all of his widow's money just by gambling and everything. So then he goes to prison, and then he ends up in a hospital because all of this has just caused a lot of trauma and distress. So it's kind of showing the downward spiral of someone who just gets given a lot of money and wastes it, which is really interesting. He does a few others, but they're a bit naughtier. So, but one of my favourite artists is Grayson Perry, and he's heavily influenced by William Hogarth. If you went to go see his exhibition at the Bristol Museum, they had some of Hogarth's prints to show actually that Grayson Perry, he likes to tell a story and he likes to warn people about sort of behaviours and like it's like a social commentary and doing things, making things about social issues that do sometimes get overlooked. Yeah. So William Morris, who we did last year, he's one of my favourite artists, coming from a textile design background. He's just incredible, like his work, the amount of work he did. I think there was a quote saying that when he died, instead of just saying what he died from, they said he died from being William Morris, doing the work of 10 men. He was just a workaholic. But I think his daughter also is a textile artist, and his wife was a muse for a lot of people of that era. So if you didn't know who William Morris was, he made these patterns, and if you look him up, you'll recognise them. If you've seen Gogglebox, there's a couple, and she's got a chair and the wallpaper of the same print, and it's this kind of cream with this green leaf pattern. That's a William Morris print. I think H&M, maybe last year or a few years ago, they did a collaboration with William Morris, so you'll see a lot of his prints still being used today in fashion, in interior, because his work's so timeless. It's all about nature, and it's just this seamless illustration that's just then repeated. Just really interesting. He also wrote a book called News from Nowhere, and although the book itself isn't that relevant, I thought the name News from Nowhere is quite a really lovely title, and I'd love to do a series of create a newspaper for Lockleaze called News from Nowhere, where we collect stories collect some of the pictures that we could then hand out, because I know a lot of people call Lockleaze the forgotten place. So I think that has quite a nice title to it, and that would be quite an interesting next project. I know he said he wanted art to be for everyone, just as education is for everyone, because back then art was seen as if you've got money, and it still is in a lot of places now. Art's still seen as an upper class or middle class thing, but really like art is for everyone, and that's why these workshops are really lovely, because you just sit, create art, and it's got no pressure. It's just for fun, and making you feel good. So I got signed up for an art and referral scheme from my brother's care coordinator, and I started going to art sessions at Hallfield Health Centre, and I just loved them. They were so important to me that every week I could go out the house and I could just be with people that I'd never seen before, and you can just make art. And then there was a lovely lady called Julie who used to run it, and she would just bring these things and then just be like, play, have fun. And then if you weren't too sure, she could come and help you. And there was just something really therapeutic about making art and not worrying about what the final piece is.